We have a collective bargaining agreement. Yesterday, the MLSPA and owners officially ratified the new agreement, which extends through 2027, which means hopefully after this week, we can stop talking about negotiations and start talking about actual soccer for the foreseeable future. We think, hope. We'll see. At any rate, this is Waking the Red Weekly. I'm Micheal Tierney, and aside from some CBA talk on this week's show, we'll also discuss what those negotiations might have meant for Toronto FC's transfer plans, some changes to the Toronto FC staff, and plenty more as part of a busy week for Canadian soccer. About 15 minutes or so, One Soccer's Ollie Platt will join us to talk about the She Believes Cup and Toronto FC's transfers and more. But first, as always, Jeffrey P. Nesker, Michael Singh, how you guys doing?
We're back.
Yeah.
We're back. I think a little bit of relief there, Mitch, that the two sides finally put things behind us and we can just look forward to the start of the season now. I'm buzzing for it.
Yep. I'm wearing this training top in honor of the fact that we actually get to go training. And guys, I need some help. Explain this to me. What's up with these little finger thumb hole things? Is that like soccer specific or?
I don't know if it's soccer specific, but I remember like when I used to play, I remember sliding my thumbs into that, and it I don't know, it felt more comfortable when I was running almost like.
Does it ground you because it forces you to like be more aware of your arms or something like that?
I don't know the science behind it. I can't tell you that, but I just if there's just slide your finger and then it sometimes it's comfy, sometimes. Like Jeff is,
It's probably also keeps your hands a little bit warm too. For the listeners, for those who aren't watching, Jeff has those kind of holes on the sleeves that are part of training tops sometimes that you can put your thumbs into. I think by now we've described it well enough. But let's talk about the big topic this week, which of course is the CBA negotiations finally ratified by both sides. As we said off the top, deal goes through to 2027, adding 2 years to the previous deal. Worth noting, of course, that is the year after the 2026 World Cup that they'll go back to the negotiating table. As of right now, that means preseason's expected to start February 22nd and the regular season on April 3rd. Sam Stejskal of The Athletic, though, did say that the time the league has spent on these negotiations might have altered some of their other planning. So I, at least reading between the lines, would anticipate some sort of delay in the start of the season. But hey, we got over the line here. We're going to have soccer next year. There isn't any lockout. I think there's definitely still negatives here, but from our standpoint, it's a pretty big positive, certainly.
Can we break it down? I mean, I have questions. I know you guys probably understand the minutia of the new CBA better than I do. The free agency is the new hotness, right? That's the sort of thing that the league is allowed.
Years.
Okay. And it's not the end of Tam Gam, thank you, ma'am?
Yeah, so it's not the end of Tam Gam, thank you, ma'am, as you put it there. No more allocation money. Sorry,
what can you buy with thank you, ma'am?
Yeah.
All
right. I don't like that laugh. Someone cut Jeff's mic. Cut Jeff.
There still will be allocation money, but in terms of the free agency, it seems like players are going to start hitting free agency earlier, but that won't start until 2026, I think it was. So, 5 years down the line from now, I think players will start hitting free agency probably a year earlier. So, I mean, that in a sense, that's a win for them. But in terms of the, salary cap increases, the amount they're going to get paid, the minimum salary is also increasing pretty significantly. I mean, from, where it is now to where it will be in 2027 for the rostered player and even non-rostered players. So that's a huge plus for all of those guys who are making 5 figures and struggling to get by. It's great to see that they can lock up their future here in the long term and just focus on soccer. So another positive for anyone growing up here trying to make it professional. There's a route, and there's a league in our own backyard that we can actually make it, and be proud of the fact that we made it there. So that's a big step forward. Another thing I want to talk about is the young designated player under 22 initiative, which again, I think details are still coming out on that, but it looks like additional 3 players on top of your designated players. If they're under the age of 22, they can go over that salary budget, it seems like.
Wow.
So that's a huge plus, especially for a team like TFC who has the money to spend. You can now purchase players that are under the age of 22 and sort of spend over that salary budget again, essentially. So I want to see how TFC actually utilize that, because they might have some players on their roster that are worthy of just Io Akinola, for example.
Yeah. I was just thinking,
could be worthy of that spot, and perhaps that's a way to extend his contract that 1 year. So I think that's a huge tidbit in the CBA that's worth mentioning. And like salary budget increases across the board throughout until 2027. I know this season and next season things will stay the same, and I think that's what the league wanted, just because of the potential fans not being the stadium revenue issues. So in that sense, that's what the league wanted. Now they also got the extra 2 years, which was what they really wanted, which was not to have to negotiate around a World Cup.
Now, what's the significance of that? The fact that this CBA is renegotiated after the World Cup happens?
I think it's just it would put the players in a better spot to negotiate for more money, right? If you're coming off a World Cup, that's where eyes are, and that's where revenue will be, right? So I think if you're coming off that year and you're negotiating, it's a better stand for the players. If you're the owners, you negotiate that 5-6 years away, the odds are the players aren't going to get the true value, especially with the way that Canada soccer and MLS in general is heading and how big it is getting. I don't think the players are going to really, benefit from this long term. But the owners got those 2 extra years locked up, which is key, so they won't have to negotiate during that time.
Yeah,
right.
Obviously,
so some stability.
Yeah. Hopefully. Again, they can. The one thing that gives me a tiny bit of pause is they can opt out of this again, or like 2022, they can invoke another force majeure clause, which could put us right back here at the negotiating table. Obviously crossing our fingers, we're hoping that doesn't happen, but it does exist, and it is worth certainly noting. But yeah, certainly this makes it even more complicated to look at MLS rosters and try and figure out how they're going to be pieced together, but also more fun, because I think that is part of the fun of this league is trying to see all the mechanisms you can use to, build a starting 11 versus just straight up spending, money on them like teams around the world do. So definitely something to look out for. I also want to talk about how this might affect Toronto FC. The first and foremost thing is now they probably have to find somewhere to play. Reports today suggesting that the Vancouver Whitecaps might be headed down to Salt Lake, which is not a bad location. I mean, we've seen, I think it was NWSL bubbled there for their first tournament. The PLL bubbled there. That's a professional lacrosse league. So, certainly a place that has been tested in terms of its ability to, keep players safe, that sort of thing. For Toronto FC, it's going to be interesting. From everything I've heard, they're not going back to Hartford. I don't think, as much as it somewhat worked out this year, I don't think the players necessarily want to go back. I've heard they'll be going somewhere maybe closer to where another Toronto team is right now. That's all I'll say.
You guys can put that 2 and 2 together. I think it's interesting. It's interesting that the Vancouver Whitecaps aren't playing. Where was it? Portland, where they were last time? Sharing that stadium. It's interesting that they're now, moving down there to Utah. I wonder if they just think that's just a better fit for their team, or perhaps they're the players themselves. They just didn't like the way that Portland was, but they're going to be sharing those facilities by all accounts in that report. Interesting. I guess I don't really know too much to make of them. I want to hear more from their side and why.
Yeah, maybe it's just as simple as a different set of 4 walls to look at, right? Like, you've been staying in that hotel for the better part of 3 months. Like, there's nothing on the room service menu that you haven't had twice. It could just be as simple as keeping the room and board fresh for the players, because it was such a drain for everyone that had to live out of a suitcase last season. So, maybe it's just this one little thing that's like a bit of a new freshness, and they're hoping for that. But I can't see that trumping existing partnerships, right? Like, TFC already has the infrastructure built in at Rentschler, so they would have to go and do that all again and figure out the ins and outs of a new stadium. Same with Vancouver. So it's probably a failing of negotiation as much as it is an attempt to freshen it up for the players.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think there just wasn't a lot to do in Hartford. Like, honestly, like I think the players just, it just wasn't an ideal spot for them.
And it's not
season.
2 months that they're going to be setting up, right? For
Right.
Hartford. They just have to do the last 2
yeah.
months. It's going to be long term here. I mean, MLS they want to get started in April and end of December. So if you think about it that way, you got to think more long term, and perhaps somewhere sunnier does make sense.
Yeah. At any rate, let's the other thing coming out of the CBA, which was interesting, was the fact that Pozuelo was looking at a loan to Saudi Arabia if the CBA didn't go through. Hear you guys' thoughts on that, because obviously, I don't think that would have been ideal for Toronto FC. Obviously, it's good to have a player play, but with international quarantine laws, all the things that are in place right now, who knows when Toronto FC would have gotten him back.
Yeah, where did that manifest? I mean, I remember seeing the article.
Sky Sports exclusive.
Oh, okay, because I read the article on our site and I knew nothing about it. I mean, it makes sense. They've been pursuing him pretty aggressively since Genk. I mean,
wasn't it Paz who had the quote about never wanting to go there, though?
It was.
Yeah.
It wasn't as strongly worded as that, but it certainly wasn't a positive, if you pardon the pun. It certainly wasn't positive, and it was in reference to his family and not wanting to take his family there, for obvious reasons. There's been a bit of a to-do on the boards with respect to the pause move, because do we look at it in the same way as we looked at the Seba move? And the general consensus is no. But the specifics are much the same, right? You have a finite career. You only have a certain amount of time to make your bank. I know you prefer me to go the other way and say an athlete wants to consistently play, but in the case of going to Arabia, you can't ignore the fact that you're going to make well above fair market value, and it's a nice way to fill up your bank account. Do we fault him? No. I mean, at the end of the day, we love this league for how crazy it is, but players might be a bit turned off by the constant renegotiations. Let's not forget this was what, the second or third time the CBA has been in play in 2 years. So yeah, I mean, he wants to play, and he doesn't want to be sitting around waiting for the league to maybe not have a season this year and then lose out on one of his years in prime, making that bank.
For sure. It was a contingency plan. And, who knows if the reports are true or not, but multiple people have reported it since. Again, like, you can't fault him for it. And I think he was just, like I said, covering his own ass there, right? The European transfer window closed by the time these negotiations were up. So perhaps if things did really go sideways, where is he going to play next season? There aren't many open windows, so one of the top teams in Saudi Arabia comes knocking. I guess at least you have to entertain it just in case, right? Especially if
absolutely.
You are the most valuable player in the league, and you have that opportunity to make a boatload of money because you have that. You're coming off that year, and if all of those, if every MLS player is a free agent next year, Paz has to be one of the hottest commodities, right? So I guess the 2 and 2 add up, and when you think about it, so. I can't really fault him for that, and I won't make too much of the rumors as well, because I think most of it was just, again, a contingency plan based on the fact that MLS might not have had a season.
Yep, and we're over that now, at least until the next force majeure clause. Ollie is on deck. He is in the green room.
Yeah, let's bring Ollie on. I did want to say it was 3 negotiations in 12 months, which
my God
is a lot of negotiating. we didn't have to do much negotiating, thankfully, to get Ollie Platt on the show this week. Thank you so much for joining us. A guest from our inaugural episode, actually, now with One Soccer Today, which is every Monday to Friday, 7 p.m. on One Soccer. Thanks so much for joining us, Ollie.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me, guys.
Cheers.
Well, let's start a little bit by talking about the uncertainty of the CBA. We were talking a little bit about Pozuelo before you came on, and the potential that there was for him to go on loan to Saudi Arabia when it wasn't known, whether or not this CBA would be ratified. How much do you think that maybe affected certainly what Toronto FC was trying to do this transfer window, and maybe some of the other clubs in MLS as well?
Yeah, it's hard to say, really. I never got the impression that I never really believed that we were going to get a lockout, to be honest. I not to say that the negotiations weren't kind of precarious at times, because obviously, the players have been unhappy for over a year now with the way some of these negotiations had gone. But I just think when it comes down to it, MLS as a league, there's such a disparity between the top end of the salary spectrum and the bottom, that the league always kind of knows, I think, that they can push the envelope a little bit and they can play pretty hard with the players. And there are a lot of guys in this league who need to get paid, right? They're not players who have millions of dollars stashed in the bank and can afford to not play for a year. So I always thought it would get done for that reason. It's just a case of how much kind of unhappiness is there in the player pool? How does this affect potentially, if this keeps happening, how does it affect MLS's reputation to foreign players? Like, does the next Pozuelo pay attention to this and think, well, this guy's having to think about going to Saudi Arabia for a year because the league's not going to play? Like, that's stuff that is completely novel to foreign players, right? So it's not a reputation that you want to build for yourself. But yeah, as I said, I thought I would have been very surprised if we'd actually got to that point where we were locked out this year, just because of some of the dynamics and, as I said, in the salaries in MLS.
So do you expect now, Ollie, more moves to happen around MLS now that the negotiations are behind us? Or do you think teams are just, negotiating anyways and bringing transfers? Because from a Toronto FC perspective, we're hoping that this sort of opens the floodgates here.
But it sure seemed like it, right? Like FC Cincinnati's going out and spending millions of dollars while also saying that they can't pay their players this year.
Trailblazing FC Cincinnati, making all the great MLS moves. They're just reinventing the wheel. I'll move on because you are talking about this transfer window. If TFC could only sign one player in this window, is it a DP or a help at the back?
I don't know if I'm in a minority on this, but I don't think their needs at the back are as pressing as maybe people make out. I know we're coming off that Nashville game where that goal didn't look good on Omar Gonzalez or Chris Mavinga, and I know there's been some concerns about those guys at times, but I tend to think that Gonzalez, he's really experienced. He's a smart player, positionally really sound. As long as the structure around him is okay, I think he's more than good enough. It's when the structure breaks down, like we saw in the last, late in that Nashville game, and he starts to get into one-on-one situations with players who are quicker than him, and he looks bad, right? He's always going to look bad in those situations. But I think as long as the team is fairly well organized, you can mostly keep him out of those situations. And as I said, I think his experience of this league compensates for his weaknesses. So I'm not saying don't bring in a defender. I'm sure they will, because Simon's gone and Zavaleta, and they need the depth there. But I certainly do think that the more pressing need is up front, where the team was just way too reliant on Pozuelo last year.
It's a fair assessment.
How are some of those younger center backs that you think TFC have, like the Julian Duns and the Rocco Romeos? Do you think they can step up right away and do a job? Yeah,
I hope so. I like Julian Dunn. I thought he was really good in the CPL for Valor last year. Getting to be at the Island Games. I didn't really get to speak to him or get to know him that well, but just kind of observe him, right? And he's just like a really calm kid and quite mature. And you really saw him over the course of that tournament. He was really quiet. When he first came into the bubble, didn't say a lot, kept himself to himself. And as the weeks went on, you really saw him kind of come out of his shell a little bit and become, a leader for the Valor team and feel like he can express himself. And I think, as I said, I think he's a pretty smart kid and, mature beyond his years in that sense. So he's the one that I'd hope I just haven't seen as much of Romeo, but Julian Dunn is the one I'd hope could maybe play a part. But the feeling I got was that Greg Vanney just didn't think so for whatever reason. He didn't seem to be sold on him. So it will really depend on what Chris Armas comes in and sees. I think young players probably will get more of a window and maybe an opportunity to fail and learn from their failures more than they did under Vanney, who seemed to want them to kind of be ready to go, right? But we'll see. I think Dunn has the potential though, for sure.
Cool.
You mentioned Toronto FC's offensive reliance kind of on Pozuelo there, and one of the big reasons for that, of course, was Jozy Altidore not being available, and when he was, probably not playing up to the standard we've come to expect from him. We're probably a week removed now, I think, from that crazy day where all the rumors came out of U.S. men's national team camp regarding the amount of interest there was in the player and potentially some conflict within Toronto FC. What are your thoughts on that whole situation and where Toronto go from here? Because it certainly seemed like things maybe aren't all that rosy.
Yeah, I don't think Ali Curtis would be doing his job if he didn't at least explore the option of moving Jozy Altidore. Like, the contract's bad, right? And then for 3 years now, the guy's been injury prone, hasn't really been there at the big times of year when they've needed him because of those injuries. Like, I just don't really see how you can go into this season. And again, I don't want to slight anything that Jozy Altidore's done in the past. We all know he's a club legend. That should go without saying. But I don't see how you can go into 2021 and think we can rely on Jozy Altidore to be healthy and to be in form, right? And that's a problem when you only have 3 DP slots and you're paying a guy that amount of money. So as I said, I think Curtis has got to. He's not doing his job if he doesn't at least explore the possibilities of moving on from Altidore. Obviously, that's going to be contentious. That's not going to make the player happy. You get kind of the Javinko situation all over again. And that can be disruptive, right? So they need to resolve it one way or another. I'm not surprised at all that they're looking at options to potentially sign a new striker to move on from Jozy Altidore. But there's going to come a point where if they can't do that, you kind of have to just accept that he's our guy, and we have to hope for the best and try to take care of his health as best as possible and move forwards, right? But for now, with it, this early in preseason, I'm not surprised that they're kind of looking around and potentially shopping him around a bit.
Yeah, the rumor guy Bore, he just had a baby, so I'm not entirely sure that's
Toronto.
that's happening, right? Like, I mean, he would have to fly with a newborn and then be in quarantine. Like, it's looking further and further away. So, let's get Messi instead, right?
Yeah.
Toronto brings in
what was his salary? That was something about his salary the other day.
In euros or Canadian dollars, just add 15 more zeros and run out of paper.
Yeah.
Do you want to be Barcelona, Toronto Football Club as well? Like, interesting.
Yeah. As long as our kids have these little thumb holes, which I'm really digging. Michael, you don't have a question written down, so I'm just going to
do I ever?
Not really. I'm showing them how the sausage is made. I'm sorry about that.
Come on. But let's move on. Let's talk some. I guess we can talk some She Believes Cup, because that's coming up and it's right around the corner. Who are some of the names?
Question.
Of course. Who are some of the names that you think that would shine at that tournament for Canada? Perhaps some of the lesser known names.
Yeah, good question. Well, I'll start with some of the more well-known ones. Like, I think I'm really interested to see Jessie Fleming, because she's actually started to get a couple of starts for Chelsea now. I'm really interested to see what that environment's done for her. I thought, to be honest, she stayed in college too long. I know that you want to, finish your education and that kind of gets a little bit of priority, I guess. But I do think that she's been beyond college caliber for probably a couple of years now, and maybe her development stalled a bit because she wasn't in the pros. So I'm interested to see what that's done for her over the past few months. In terms of lesser known players, like the one I think that everyone's kind of excited to see is Evelyn Vienne, right? But just someone who's scored at every level she's been at, continued to score in the NWSL and in France. And, now we're finally, I'm surprised she hasn't been called up before now, but we're finally going to get to find out whether she can be some kind of solution for a team that hasn't been scoring enough goals for a while now, right? So, those two stand out to me as two that I'll be watching.
I'm excited for that.
What would you call a success in terms of the women's national team performance at the She Believes Cup?
I'd say you want to try and get second place, right? Like the US are the US. But I think other than that, especially with Japan dropping out, Brazil's a team, I'd probably put them ahead of Canada right now, or at least on what we've seen over, the end of Heiner Moller's time in charge. But that's a team that you've got to want to be able to compete against, right, and get a result against if you're going to do anything at the Olympics, anything at the next World Cup. So, Canada haven't necessarily been there. They had a bad defeat against Brazil after the last World Cup. But I think a Canada team that's playing well, that's really playing to its potential, should be able to go up against Brazil and get a result. So, yeah, US is always going to be tough, and it will be tough for a while, I think. But rest of the field, I think Canada should be wanting to be on top of that.
That'll be a good measuring stick game for sure.
For sure, yeah.
One of the questions I want to ask specifically is I want to ask about Jordan Huitema, because she's a really interesting name, because she was really hyped up to really succeed Christine Sinclair almost, and she's still very young, and she's finding her footing still at PSG. But do you still think that hype is still around her, and does she still have what it takes to be Canada's next number 9?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? I've always been kind of a little bit cautious with Jordan Huitema, because I think the fact is that what she's done so far is she scores a lot of goals against poor teams, right? And that's fine. That's she's ahead of schedule compared to most players of her age, right? She's playing for PSG. She's already got however many national team caps. You got to make it all relative and say that she's already way ahead of most of her peers in her age group. But she hasn't really proven herself yet against top opposition, either for club or country. And so that's the next step she's got to take, right? And I know a lot of people want to see her in the starting lineup. They want to see her and Sinclair paired together and playing together now. For me, I've got to see her do it against a stronger opponent before I'm really putting her in pen in the best 11, because there are a lot of other good, theoretically good attacking options in Janine Becky and Michelle Prince and now Bien and other players, right? So she's for sure got the talent to be, a core player for Canada for years to come. But I just think she's still in that process of really maturing and actually showing it at a top level. But, there's a reason she's at PSG, and obviously a lot of people think that that's going to come, and hopefully it does.
Yeah, and of course they have the England friendly coming up as well, so that'll be a fun one, especially with Bev Priestman angle on that. Of course, this tournament on One Soccer, which is awesome considering being able to watch these games after what happened at the men's camp, unfortunately, with a couple of highlights, that sort of thing. we lost the camera there, but I did want to talk just briefly finally here about the men's national team, and of course the news that Ricardo Ferreira is finally committed to Canada. Certainly a player they've known about for a long time. I know Zambrano on his tour of Europe trying to talk to all these guys, talked to him a couple of years ago, but Herdman was finally able to no, it certainly wasn't. I think the week after, who was it? Who's the Italian guy who
Brian Cristante.
Yeah, Cristante played for Italy, and then Ferrara and I think Eustachio both played for Portugal. So certainly Herdman's had more success, and he's bringing in a player that has played at a very high level. Not recently, though, considering the injuries. What do you think Canada could be getting in Ricardo Ferreira? Certainly, I think the health is the biggest factor here.
Right, for sure. And I said this on our show last week. There's two questions for me. One is, can you get him healthy in the first place? Because it's been 3 years now where he's been, pretty devastated by knee injuries and not played a lot of games. And then secondly, is he still at the same level he was, back when he was playing for Braga and getting called up to the Portuguese national team? Because that player is obviously Canada's best centre-back and a massive addition to the programme. But if, you know, the wear and tear of those injuries has lowered his level a little bit, then obviously you don't know so much, right? So yeah, it's potentially a great addition. Obviously, there's no negative to it. You get the player in, you know, committed to Canada. You try and hope he gets healthy. You get him in camps and see how it goes. So there's no downside. But is he a sure thing to be the player that we were all clamoring over 2 or 3 years ago to play for Canada? You can't say so at this point, right? Because the injuries he's had, you know, even worse than Jozy Altidore. It's been like just his. I don't know how many knee injuries he's had, but it's like you've got to think that that's going to be something that's going to take a while to really fully come back from. But fingers crossed, and you know, he's still a good age, and hopefully he can get back to where he was.
Yeah, don't love the idea of him playing on some of those CONCACAF surfaces. It's probably not probably not going to prolong the career at all. But yeah, thanks so much.
Well, we missed
one more question.
Well, because we missed talking about it in the preamble, so we might as well ask Ollie if he thinks Tigres have even a snowball's chance in hell of taking Bayern in the Club World Cup.
Well, Bayern can't really defend that this season, it seems like. So maybe there's like a window of opportunity there. I love Tigres as a team. They're like, for me, and I know they spend a lot of money, so it's easier said than done. But they're like the pinnacle of what we should want to see in CONCACAF, right? Like they're a team that goes after big players. They have a good core of Mexican players as well. When they came to Toronto, they were just so professional. Like Tuca Ferretti doesn't really say anything, but you just know he's kind of a competent coach. And everything about them is like it's like a big club, right? Like it's comparable to what you see in Europe and things like that. So they're like the kind of North Star, the aspiration, I think, for every club that wants to be big in CONCACAF. So I hope they can give them a good game. And as I said, Bayern are pretty fragile at times, so you never know.
Will they be taking selfies with Bayern players after the game?
Probably Alfonso, right?
It has to be Fonzie. Fonzie for sure. That's a given. We can give you a pass for that.
To be fair, in terms of Tigres, you know, they came to BMO Field shortly, I guess, before Club America, so that made them look a little bit better in terms of all the chaos that happened with Club America's visit to BMO Field. But no, definitely agree on that. But yeah, Ollie, thanks so much for taking the time this week.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, guys.
Cheers, man.
Yeah. Again, you can catch Ollie alongside Andy Petrillo and Gareth Wheeler weeknights, 7 p.m. over on One Soccer. Always have some great discussions about all things soccer. Michael's having some real issues here with the phone.
Oh man!
When's your birthday, Michael? I know exactly what I'm getting you as a present. It's a phone stand.
You know, I was gonna call Ollie a big leaguer there, and I'm here fiddling around with my headphones and stuff. He's got the big One Soccer stage right now, and that's great to see. Former WTR managing editor moving up. So
I know it's always
rooting for Ollie. And,
well, he's got such a brilliant soccer mind. It's so much fun to pick his brains. What's next? We haven't talked about J-Dave.
Oh, we can talk about J-Dave.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, we can.
Ottawa
5
native.
goals, last 5 games. Yeah, Ottawa native.
Ottawa native, Jonathan David. Let's go.
Yeah, it looks like he's finally fully settled into the player that we knew he all could be with Lille. I mean, they're flying right now, and a big reason for that is that Jonathan David's scoring every game and getting them huge results right now. So obviously pretty exciting and big stuff coming up for him. You know, they've got that Europa League tie against Ajax, which obviously will be a great opportunity for him to prove, you know, the caliber of player that he can be. And you know, obviously top of Liga, everyone's watching right now, and he's, you know, when the spotlight's on, he's shining.
Yeah.
Which goal did you prefer? The second one to me was the one that I watched over and over
all day.
And over.
All day.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was some great combination play.
It was so fast.
Unbelievable.
So
and just the way he kind of stuttered to stop his run a tiny little bit to like ruin all the defenders and then became completely unmarked in the box. God, I mean, he's so calm in the box. I think I said this in the chat. You can't teach that. I mean, that's a skill to not lose your head.
Having the awareness to play a give and go with a ball coming in at that pace in the box, and to finish first time after receiving the ball back with your weak foot and the finish that he had, that's world class. And I don't think any goalkeeper in the world stopping that, let alone like many defenders. I got to scoot in to see what Will's saying here. When has Canada ever had two top players playing and starting regular minutes with two teams leading their respective teams in top leagues? Pinch me. Yeah, straight up. No. And this is something I also wanted to talk about. You have Jonathan David, who is the most expensive Canadian transfer ever since making the move over in the summer. He started off with 2 goals in 25 games. And as Mitch said, he now has 5 in his last 5. Lille, his team, who he's the number 9 for at 21 years old in League One, is ahead of Neymar's Paris Saint-Germain, Kylian Mbappe's PSG by 3 points. He's ahead of Lyon by 2 points. And Lille is off to their best start ever with Jonathan David at the leading the charge. And then you look over, you have Alphonso Davies, and obviously we all know what he's doing with Bayern Munich. And it all brings me to what I want to talk about, which was the Athletics article of Stan Stachel and Paul Torino. They had a great read about how MLS players are now being revalued, and it's a different type of valuation now because teams overseas, what they said was MLS is sort of like a black hole to those teams, to those European teams. No one really knows what MLS is. And there's a good quote in there from Jesse Marsh, and Jesse Marsh was saying he had a ton of people asking him about it because he obviously now is over there at Red Bull, and he's the closest sort of link to the two leagues. But
everybody's going to think that all MLS is just pressing all the time because they're just asking Red Bull people. They're like, MLS, yeah.
Another great anecdote, and this kind of ties into what we were talking about last week with TFC, was Weston McKennie. And he was the FC Dallas product who actually never ended up came through the FC Dallas Academy, but didn't sign an MLS contract. Instead, he opted to go overseas himself. Obviously, he's found his way onto Juventus, and he's made a huge name for himself at Juventus. And that ultimately sparked the interest in Brian Reynolds, which we all follow that saga a bunch, and Juventus was right in there. And that's because of what Weston McKennie did. So if we can relate that to Canada, you think about what Alphonso Davies and what Jonathan David are doing, you got to think about how people are circling, Canada soccer and looking for that next star, because the people who are going over there right now, they're the ones that they're tearing up and they're being trailblazers. They're setting the pace for Canada soccer. And this is going to... Yeah, go ahead.
Can I slow your roll a tiny little bit? Just bring up 2 things. Do you think that maybe some of this has to do with the fact that the big European teams are in a bit of a budget crunch and they can swoop in and buy these players for cheaper because MLS is one of the more untapped markets?
I don't
know.
So it could be a combination of both for sure. It's an untapped market, and that's definitely, you want to get ahead of that. But I don't think that's the ultimate reason. I think the ultimate reason is that they're starting to realize the talent is there, and sure, they can get it at a cheaper price than other places in the world, like obviously paying for a player from like Santos, for example, from Brazil. Exactly. Like you're going to pay an extra premium for that player.
Well, yeah, we wanted Lucas Hansen so badly, and what was his team? They refused to go down on his transfer fee, right? Like they just weren't willing to play ball with us. And I think that
Lucas Hansen.
But I would think that an MLS team. Well, I think about Lucas Hansen all the time because of Erickson Gallardo, and I'd rather have had Lucas Hansen. But you got to think that an MLS team, when the old lady comes calling, they're like, "Oh my God, what do you want? We'll give you the locker room. Like, do you want his apartment? Like, what can we do?" So there's a part of me, and I feel the same way about J. Dave. I'm not ready to let my heart accept that there won't be more bumps in the road for him. As excited as I am about the last couple of games, and as excited as I am about reading Twitter and all the Lille fans going, maybe he isn't crap after all, which has been like a pretty major theme on the Lille fan boards. I do reserve a bit of cynicism.
Jay Days wasn't cheap. To your other point, he's the most expensive signing in their team history, right? Something along those lines. And
no, he was. He broke their transfer record.
Yeah, and I think that only drives the valuation of the next Canadian player up. Perhaps even someone like Ayo Akinola, who is probably the closest thing Canada has to a Jonathan David right now, right? Is that pure number 9 sort of build. does that the way that Jonathan David is performing, does that inflate Ayo Akinola's price even slightly, right? Does it get more teams interested in him? It's a ripple effect, and again, the more the better that Jonathan David and Alphonso Davies play, it's the better for kids back home here.
I don't think I think that's inarguable. I just .com bubbles. All we do is talk about bubbles these days, and the one thing that's constant in bubbles is that they eventually burst. So, what does this mean for the future of MLS players? Is this like a weirdo kind of wrinkle in time where the collusion of North American players making proper indents into the European leagues at the same time as the European leagues are looking for value everywhere? Just how does that all end up? Is
either way, Jeff, I'll take it, because it's the start of a movement, and I really think it's just the beginning of it. And
absolutely,
either way that European teams want to accept their players, if it is because they're cheaper, so be it. We'll just get our players over there because our players are good enough, and it's about time.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And obviously hope that this extends to the Canadian Premier League as well. Kind of need the proof of concept there first. They need someone who can go over there and prove that they can play up to that high level. Obviously, Dominic Zator going over to Sweden right now is a good sign, that sort of thing. They're starting to develop those relationships and that sort of thing, but definitely need the one young guy to go over and do what Jonathan David and Alfonso is doing, or Weston McKennie. But there's way more proof in MLS.
So Tristan Borges wasn't that guy?
Well, he doesn't have a squad number. He's squad number free. Yeah.
It's been a rough year for him. Yeah.
Is that realistic for the CPL, Mitch, or would the CPL be more of a feeder to MLS and then to Europe? Right.
I think it is realistic for the Canadian Premier League. I think at some point, especially if, again, you need that proof of concept, but we're now talking about the MLS valuations going up. If teams start to shy away from how expensive those prices are getting, they can find some absolute bargains in the Canadian Premier League, right? And that's where I think the Canadian Premier League can succeed is not necessarily selling guys on the cheap, but selling guys at much cheaper than you could get in MLS and offering those kind of bargains. And we know, based on the budgets of some of these teams, what a world of difference even a 6-figure transfer would do for any of these clubs, right? And that's honestly how this league has positioned itself from the beginning, as a model that's based on that. So
that's the thing, is I don't think they need to compete with MLS or anything like that, because MLS will be sending players hopefully to big leagues like Serie A, the Premier League. Soccer is a big place, and you can send a player to the Swedish second division for a good transfer fee, or something along those lines. So I think the Canadian Premier League is in line with MLS there, perhaps on a smaller scale, but like you said, a couple $100,000, that makes a massive difference for Canadian Premier League club.
Perfect segue to the fact that the new CCL, the new CONCACAF system, is really opening up the floodgates for that CanCon, my friends. What is it? 3 guaranteed places, as many as 5, because finally Canadian teams playing in MLS that win MLS things are allowed MLS prizes. I mean, the league's only 25 years old. I'm very glad that we figured this out now. So
this almost feels like an apology, though. Like, we're getting.
I'll take it. I mean, the years that I've had to explain to casual fans. So if they win MLS Cup, they're in the Champions League. No. They have to first solve these riddles 3. And people are like, why do you watch
if they win
this
the
team?
league, they're good, right?
Nope. Sorry. No. It goes to Atlanta again. What? Why? I mean, so yeah, it's that's pretty awesome news. And of those 3 places, one is the traditional Canadian Championship Voyageurs Cup place, and 2 are CPL dependent of the 3 guaranteed.
2 are CPL. Yeah, 2 are CPL. I think one was supposed to be the season winner, and one was supposed to be like the actual playoff winner. We're supposed to get first into that. And it's only going to be a 16-team tournament, if I'm not mistaken, something like that.
Something like that. I read a breakdown on the MLS mothership, the winners and losers.
it's supposed to be pretty small, but I like the revamp format. I think it's a lot more straightforward, and the best countries are now going to be represented in CONCACAF. I think the best.
I think the only question I had was has it been definitively stated whether or not the final is aggregate or one and done?
I think it was. I wouldn't be able to tell you what it is, but
I thought everything was moving to single knockout now. We probably should have done more research on this.
Yeah,
before
before we talked about it.
we jumped into it, but
I love aggregate, guys. I'm sad. I love aggregate. I realize that we got to get out of pandemic first before we consider two-legged series. But I love aggregate math.
MLS Cup. Did you like the one leg or did you like the aggregate? Because this year we had the one leg, right?
I think finals.
I like aggregate.
Finals should always be one and done.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That
I agree.
Stretching out a final.
I kind of like the one and done throughout the whole process because I just think the games are more exciting. Maybe it's just the North American mindset. But
going out 1-0 to Nashville, that wasn't very exciting.
Any game 7, man, I can get into it. And if the first leg is always a little bit less entertaining for me out of a 2-leg affair.
Give me the tactics.
I can get into that. I'm on board, but just from a casual supporter's perspective, I like the idea of a game 7 every playoff game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's arguments to be made for both sides, but I really love I love drunk aggregate math, and I don't ever want to say goodbye to drunk aggregate. It's like, are we winning? Are we losing? I don't know.
To put a bow on this, though, I think the more opportunity Canadians have to get exposed to all of CONCACAF's tricks and all the things that happen in away legs in CONCACAF, I think the better. So, the more Canadian teams, the more Canadian players that can get involved in something like this. I mean, we've already seen, I think we're going to see the dividends of what Oso and those guys went through in their CONCACAF run for the Canadian men's national team. So, it can only be better if there's more Canadian teams involved.
It really is a trial by fire, isn't it? Like, or
Absolutely.
trial by bags of urine. Either way you slice it, it is something special. Phil B did all right in Series 2, did he not?
It's not over yet. So the first 2 days of qualification, the first 2 days of the group stage, essentially, he did okay. He still has some work to do, kind of just like the last time. He has to get hot here. I think today's his last day of qualification, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll keep an eye out, keep you guys updated, and hopefully if he can get into that top 8, he'll move on to the quarterfinals there, and that's where things get interesting because he's been there a bunch of times, almost every time he's been there, but he hasn't been able to quite get over that hump. So another shot at League Series 2. Hopefully, he gets a couple of bounces, and we're rooting for Phil, and we're seeing him take home a trophy. This is the second last tournament before EMLS Cup, which is obviously the big one. So it isn't the end of the world if he doesn't do well in this tournament, but obviously we're rooting for him regardless.
Yeah, he's our guy. He's our guy. Do we want to close it out with raising a toast to our man Kristian Jack?
Oh. Yeah, I think we should.
Yeah. It's tough to even find the words to be honest with you. Like, Kristian Jack has, you guys saw the response that he received when he obviously did announce the news that he was let go there by Bell Media. What Kristian Jack has done for Canada soccer is words can't describe it.
It's immeasurable.
Yeah, we talk about the players a lot on the show, and he's just as big of part of growing the game in this country. So we know here at Waking the Red, he's a friend of the show. He'll be fine. Like, we're not worried about that. It's just,
will TSN be fine? I mean, it's
the World Cup coming up, with the Euros coming up, with how much we're talking about Canada soccer growing, and to go lose one of the leaders of the game in this country.
If not the guy, let's be honest.
If not the leader of the game in this country. It doesn't make sense on so many levels. And again, we're excited to see what he does next because we know it is coming, but just why? It didn't need to go down that road. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different things that go behind
Yeah,
the
I
scenes,
am not going to open
we won't get into it that
I don't
much.
have
But
access to their financials.
yeah, just from an outsider's perspective, let's say
Yeah,
it's
it was an absolute
mind-boggling.
WTF moment. Yep,
Mhm.
I agree.
Mind-boggling.
I
Yeah,
agree.
I mean, certainly as you guys have said, raise the level of conversation. I think, like, in terms of soccer discussion in Canada, like the IQ and the kind of discussions that he was having on a weekly basis were, as you guys said, raise the standard, I think. And every time I listen to KJ, I learn something new. So obviously,
Every time,
very disappointing. And
every single time.
No,
as you guys have said, we're 6 years away from a World Cup. It's just it's disappointing to see the level of coverage in this country. And obviously, we're trying to do what we can here at Waking the Red, and I think we do a pretty good job. But you'd like to see more. You'd like to see more variety, and unfortunately, right now it kind of feels like the industry is shrinking a little bit. And again, that's disappointing because we have such an opportunity here, once in a lifetime really opportunity to shine light on the game in this country. And it feels like some of the people who are the very best at doing that are getting their platforms unfortunately taken away from them.
For sure, honestly. And you can call it like TSN, Sportsnet. You guys have to do better. You guys have to do more for soccer in this country. Having the Canadian press as the only articles on your website about soccer is just not good enough. The direction that the game is going, there's like, you have Alphonso Davies, who could be the most popular athlete in this country. He's could be the best left back in the world, and he's so recognized globally. And I feel like almost in our own country we do him injustice because we don't have enough soccer coverage. There's going to be the next.
Can you
Alphonso
buy a
Davies.
Canada shirt? Please show me how to buy a Canada shirt. It's like it's draconian, and then you just give up. Like, forget about the name set. Also, so there's a lot of logistical nightmares going on here. A lot of ignoring a sport that maybe traditionally got ruined a lot of media executive careers. Right? It's not. Let's not dilly dally here. Soccer has always been on a kind of like whale trajectory in terms of eyeballs in Canada, and maybe it's not enough for us to be screaming from the mountaintops. No, this time it's finally going to take, because they've heard it all before, right? And but again, I agree with you. Like, we are at the precipice of a World Cup in our country in our lifetimes, right? If there was ever a time to bet heavy on soccer,
it's not even just the World Cup. It's what everyone else is doing too. It's what Alphonso Davies is doing, Jonathan Davis. It's what the Canadians women's national team is doing. It's literally on every front except for this media coverage, and that's the only disconnect I'm seeing right now. Because honestly, our Canadian athletes get more media coverage overseas than they do in our own country. And that's because of the biggest media players in our country right now, because they don't give them enough attention. And obviously, we don't have the numbers in front of us, and we can't tell them what to do, but we can try.
Listen, if you had told me before the Super Bowl that this would be one of the lowest rated I didn't watch it because Eggball and me were not great bedfellows, but if you had told me that the ratings would be lower for the Super Bowl than they have been in decades, during a pandemic when no one can go outside and only has television to watch, I would have been like, "Are you crazy?" But that's what happened. I mean, people found something else to watch when they're the definition of a captive audience. So I don't know, man. It's crazy out there. I would have bet heavy on the ratings being higher without batting an eyelash. And
I didn't see the Super Bowl ratings, to be honest with you.
No, it's going around the horn now that they were a lot lower than expected, considering the specifics of what we're living in right now. So, you take that as an example that, you can apply logic, but sometimes the result is entirely illogical. So,
yeah, and just to bring it back around full circle is, again, we wish KJ all the best of luck, and he's a first class professional, and he went out with class. And remember the anecdote that he kind of told in his tweet there is one that I think will stick with me for the rest of my life, and that was when the executives there at TSN, they were saying that he has to almost, I'm going to paraphrase, but they were saying that he has to sort of dumb down his work for the soccer moms out there who might not understand.
Mm-hmm.
And KJ's response to them is, don't worry about them, they're going to catch up. And
Yeah.
like for the game in this country, to move, accelerate the game in this country, is they're going to have to catch up. And again, yeah, we can raise a toast to KJ on
Absolutely.
that note, because I think that's a perfect way of summing up who KJ is.
Yep. You never talk down to us. Kevin, producer Kev, wants us to talk about this UEFA Conference League, and I don't, because it's stupid and I don't want to happen.
All right, let's give one final shout out to the, talk about the Super Bowl, the real biggest world's team sports competition, which of course is the Club World Cup.
I love the Club World Cup. I don't know why it doesn't get enough love. I think it's such a fantastic tournament. The fact that it's consistently played in some countries that maybe don't have the best records on human rights and that sort of thing is a little iffy, but I love that game. I love the Club World Cup. I am so looking forward to the final on Thursday.
Yeah, two things to mention in the final. Of course, first CONCACAF team, as we mentioned, with Tigres making the final. And then, of course, first Canadian who could win it with Alphonso Davies playing against them and Bayern Munich. So a lot to look out for in that game. Very
that
excited
kid's trophy
for that.
case, he's going to need a whole house for his trophy.
Tell me
It's
about
ridiculous.
it. How old is he?
It's ridiculous.
Is he 19 still, or how old is he?
No, he's 20 now, I believe.
20?
He's 20, and he's won
old.
just about. Yeah, take him out back behind the barn, guys. Alfonso's time is done.
Yeah,
it's
almost like the Kylian Mbappe thing. Like once when he was in the Champions League final, it's like if he wins this, does he just does he win soccer? Like is it worth doing it anymore? But
straight up, he's reaching that level, man. He's reaching that level with the amount of accolades that he's racking up, and I think there might not be much debate as to who the best left back in the world is right now, because I think before it was sort of Andy Robertson and Alphonso Davies, but one of them has stayed consistent. The other one seems to be struggling, and I think that Fonzie is the best left back in the world. Anytime I can take a Liverpool jab and get one.
I was gonna say one more Liverpool shot.
Yeah. Tell us how you really
feel. Regardless,
better.
It would be cool to see a Canadian win some kind of World Cup at least. But that brings us to the end of this week's show. Big thank you, of course, to Ollie Platt for hopping on. Never gets old talking beautiful game with that guy. Thanks to Kevin and Sophia Homestand for all the things they've been doing in the background on this show. On behalf of Jeff and Michael, thanks so much for tuning in. Until next Tuesday.
Ciao.